Hello, everyone, and welcome to Left is Law, devoted leftist resistance, delivering the daily knowledge you need to be informed and create change. I'm Ryan. Let's break this down. Before we get too deep into today's episode, I just want to let you all know that we are officially available as a podcast on the link below. Please follow, subscribe, share, and we should be making our way onto Spotify here pretty soon. I'll let you know when we're up there as well. Today I want to talk about the Muslim ban, or the travel ban, as some are calling it, 5 to 4, and how it relates to executive power and securitization. If you have not seen my video on securitization, I just put that up today, and I think you should watch it, because rather than having me re-explain at the end of this video how that works, it would make a lot more sense for you to just watch that first and then come back to this, because that will really put that in light. First, let's break down this case, though. So what were the justifications passed on this 5 to 4 decision in favor of finally upholding the travel ban? Remember that there have been several iterations of this ban. That at first, we passed it, it was clearly a Muslim ban, everybody knew it, it was struck down. This happened like several times, and then this time, now that they've recrafted it a few times, Trump's attorney is basically arguing it's actually not a Muslim ban, it's just a travel ban. And, many of us can clearly say, hey, it probably looks a lot like one, seeing as it, has always targeted Muslims, but they did add a couple other countries, so I think it'll go down in almost history as his attorney saying, and I quote, something along the lines of, if this were a Muslim ban, it would be the worst one in history. And his argument being, well, we have all these other countries, not all of them are majoritively Muslim, so it's not a Muslim ban. Now, on the other side, the other attorney was saying precisely that. It is a Muslim ban, and you should look to Trump's campaign rhetoric to understand this. The judges, I think, honestly respond with, even as a person who's obviously vehemently anti-travel ban and would have voted against it, with what I think is a pretty fair question. And that is, what's the bright line on that? And by that, we mean we know that Trump's intentions are clearly racist, but arbitrary bright lines are not good for precedent. And so the argument was asked, well, how long do we hold this against him? At what point do we say it has been reformed to not be a travel ban anymore? Trump in particular is a bad president, but they have to ask this question on presidents as a whole, and I'll get into that in a second. So there is a 5 to 4 judgment, as we already talked about, in favor of the ban, and even those who do vote for it say that Trump is bad, but that this is a presidential power. And they're disturbed, right? They make several comments about, things like even bigotry and not addressing equality. And it's clear that this particular president probably should not hold that power. But what they say is that we have to look at the question of presidential powers in general. And they argue that basically he should have this power. He's always had this kind of power. And so if the president has this power, then we can't take it away from this particular one just because this particular one is particularly bad. Obviously, the dissent is furious. Sonia Sotomayor delivers an incredible dissent. I recommend you just listen to it. And she reads quotation after quotation of Trump clearly articulating animus, which is what they were looking for, against Muslims. And even from, the reasonable observer perspective is the one that they use. And it's worth noting that the anti-travel ban attorney even argued that you could look at Trump's quotations from a week ago, from a month ago, from the videos that he tweeted out, right? But they were not willing to put any timeline on this, and so they ultimately rule in favor of him. And again, Sotomayor is very upset. She even cites Korematsu, which is the Japanese internment camp. She says, as here, the government invoked an ill-defined national security threat to justify an exclusionary policy of sweeping proportion. As here, the exclusion was rooted in dangerous stereotypes about, inter alia, a particular group's supposed inability to assimilate and desire to harm the United States. And it's true. And when we think about things like the registry, like it not just starting with the ban, especially, if there were to be more attacks, like I hate to see how quickly this administration would digress. But there's this idea that people in the United States need to act like Americans, they need to speak English, they need to abandon their prior culture, and we are scared to hell of people who refuse to do that. You can kind of look at the securitization video again to understand that, but the gist of it is we do not like difference. We only like things that we very easily understand, and we want to keep difference away from us, and that in very much a way does echo the Japanese internment camp decision. And, in that decision, an entire group of people were pushed out. In this case, maybe a couple different groups of people were pushed out, but there's almost no doubt that it is a discrimination against a certain type of ideology, a certain person, a certain body that we don't like, right? Even if there are multiple of those bodies, there is a idea of what is good in the United States, and it looks a lot like a white Christian who speaks English and has a family, and then everything outside of that, is a potential threat. So here's the problem with this case. It is true that we all know that the reasonable person can interpret that Trump is targeting Muslims, but there is no bright line of reasonability, and it's evident that the conservative justices' notion of what is reasonable is radically different than the left-leaning justices, and that's the problem with reasonability as a whole, is that we don't have a clear understanding of what it is, and mine is very different than the conservative justices, right? And I think that mine is reasonable, they think that mine is not. It's a serious problem. So if Trump and his team now start saying that it's not a Muslim ban, what is the time frame, again, by which we can say, yes, it is, because you said it was however many days ago? And it's that issue that ultimately allows the conservative justices to say, we don't agree with Trump, but we think that the president has this power in general. So we could fight back and forth for days about how the justices should have ruled against it. They should have. But perhaps we should have been looking in the first place at ruling on different grounds. Again, reasonability is arbitrary. We know that Alex Jones would defend this ban to his deathbed, and that to me means that instead it's time to take a serious look at executive power. Perhaps the judiciary should have ruled against this on grounds of this is an overstepping of what executive power ought to be. Instead, though, we frequently default to the executive in times of crisis, right? And particularly like real crisis, World War II. But it's worth noting that when are we not in a state of crisis, right? Like right now is probably not a crisis. We don't really have attacks left and right, but Trump's rhetoric, we are of course in a state of crisis. Again, this ties into the notion of securitization. Please watch that if you haven't yet. But what was his exact wording? It was something along the lines of, we have to ban these people until we figure out what the hell is going on. Well, what's going on, Donald? Like, things are fine. Right? And that notion can be suspended indefinitely. We can always be in a time of crisis, and this means that giving executive power that is extreme in times of crisis encourages fascism. Shouldn't the judiciary be a check on the president overstepping himself in the name of security? Again, we know there is no perfect security, and its pursuit is dangerous and leads to actual harm. So, yes, in times of crisis, whatever a real crisis is, the executive needs the ability to act quickly, but not recklessly. And it certainly doesn't mean that the other two branches shouldn't be able to check the president. Quite the opposite. That is exactly why they exist. So if the executive needs to act quickly to create national security, that's one thing. But to allow that power to be somewhat indefinite, to allow it to culminate in policies that are racist, that are nonsensical, that just have no place in American society, things like internment camps, things like travel bans, it is absolutely the place of the judiciary to step in. And if the judiciary thinks that it's not, it is time for us to seriously re-examine how we think about the balance of power in these branches and the way that we have established things in such a manner that allows for things like martial law, like internment camps, and allows for the instillment of fascism just because someone can manufacture a crisis. We should very much step away from that. If you liked what you saw today, please subscribe, watch some of our other videos, hit our podcast, and we look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Have a good one.